We're glad to have Laura offer that prayer, and it's my privilege to offer this introduction. We at the Faculty Center feel very strongly about the importance of these lectures because I think they offer a window into the life and experiences of our faculty and in their journey, both arriving at BYU and while they've been here, and the kind of integration they've worked on throughout their life of their intellectual and spiritual lives. Ben Ogles was born in Whittier, California, and raised in Brigham City. There may have been something in the water in Brigham City for future deans. Scott Miller also grew up with Ben in Brigham City. He received his BA in accounting and later his PhD in psychology here at BYU, which he completed in 1990. His hire at Ohio University led to a successful career that resulted in research published in such venues as the Journal of Clinical Psychology, Professional Psychology, Research and Practice, and the Journal of Child and Family Studies, among other publications. He was the lead author of the book Essentials in Outcome Management, written with Michael J. Lambert and S. Field. And after promotion to associate and full professor due to his exceptional interpersonal and administrative skills, he was eventually made chair and then dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Ohio. And then BYU got lucky enough to lure him back to his alma mater in 2011 to serve as the new dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. Ben's hire was a tremendous blessing to his colleagues in the college and to the university. He has been admired over these years of his service, which concluded last year, for his fair-mindedness, his excellent listening skills, and his standout abilities as a communicator. These qualities led to a number of important accomplishments during his time as dean. Most notably, he initiated and supported important efforts to improve the working environment for women faculty and faculty of color, to increase the civic engagement of students by supporting a new minor, and to promote the use of motivated interviewing skills in the college and in the university, and to do the indispensable and very public work with colleagues of improving BYU's response to sexual assault. I don't think the community will soon forget his remarkable address to the campus on consent. The most effective and accomplished administrators, in my view, know how to tap into the energy and insight of their colleagues and to create a true spirit of collaboration. If you know Ben, you know that he is not someone to feel threatened by someone's ideas or criticism, and he is able to channel the best ideas to fruitful ends. He simply administrates without much of an ego. He's not interested in getting credit for the things he accomplishes, and this is precisely what makes him more effective than most. At the Faculty Center, we knew that his many years of service had provided him with a unique vantage point to speak about the intersection of his faith and his work in academia in a way that would benefit and inspire us all. We are all asked to serve, we faculty, beyond the classroom and independent of our scholarly endeavors, but our service, as much as our teaching and our scholarship, should be rooted in our faith and informed by our scholarship, as it has been for Ben. So we're so grateful that he has agreed to share his thoughts with us today. I want to acknowledge his wife and his daughter and other family members who are joining us online, and for the audience online, we're grateful to have them. And after Ben's speech, we'll have time for some questions and apparently kolaches out in the hall. So we look forward to that. Ben Ogles.
Thanks for that generous introduction, George. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for coming. Everyone who asked me, I told them they should really wait till it is posted online, because then you can watch it at 1.5 speed, and it will save you some time of boredom. I also think it's fitting that I was able to print my remarks on unused Dean letterhead, which was quite satisfying. It's not uncommon for faculty to refer to colleagues who accept administrative positions as having gone to the dark side. It hardly matters what the position is. It could be a chair or a director. Any connection with the administration may be viewed with some degree of skepticism by the faculty, since, as one author noted, once in an administrative post, the administrator is often viewed as being increasingly removed from the central academic concerns. Besides, the separation of the faculty from the administration, along with the cynicism about and distrust for and even obstruction of administrative agendas, is all too common in higher education. As George noted, I began my first administrative position at Ohio University, as actually there as the director of the clinical psychology doctoral program in 1999, after 9 years as a faculty member. From that point until July 1st of this year, when I finished as the dean, I served for 22 consecutive years as an academic administrator in 4 different positions at 2 different universities. So I suppose some people might say I belong on this LP cover. For the, whoops, I'm one ahead, aren't I? Oh, that's Ohio University and BYU, I didn't move the slide, sorry. I might be on this LP cover. For the students in the room, this is the cover for a record by Pink Floyd called Dark Side of the Moon. If you're not sure what an LP is or a record, Melinda, just see me after and I'll explain it to you. Because of my unusual administrative journey, I was surprised when George called me and asked if I'd be willing to give the Scholar of Faith lecture. It seemed to me that scholarship had taken a rather secondary role, though still an important one, for most of my career, so I wasn't sure that I really fit. After some further conversations, we decided that perhaps my unique administrative journey wasn't all bad, and I might have something to contribute. So I'll start first with some personal background that undoubtedly influenced my journey, and then I'll present in a much less organized way a few of the lessons that I learned along my long path of academic administration. Some of the lessons may seem like sort of common sense or relatively simplistic to some of you, yet I'm hopeful that each of you may find at least 1 or 2 tasty morsels, even though these thoughts come from the dark side. I was the first of 9 children, born to Charles and Val Jean Ogles. When I was 10 years old, I had 7 younger siblings. Yes, my mother had 8 children in 10 years. My parents once took the baby and asked me to watch the other children while they went out. I told all my siblings to go outside and play, and then I locked the doors and watched television. This strategy was not greeted warmly by my parents. I thought it was quite effective. And perhaps my experiences helping to manage that group of siblings was the perfect preparation for academic administration. My father grew up in Georgia, then moved to Utah as a teen. My mother was born and raised in Blanding, Utah. She was a teenager when her family moved to Provo following her father's death from cancer. I didn't really know either of my grandfathers. My mother's father died when she was young, and my father's father only visited us once when I was very young before he passed away. In contrast, I knew both my grandmothers very well. My mother's mother, Waisel Washburn, was an especially important influence. I lived with her while I attended a summer term at BYU between my junior and senior years of high school. And later, my wife and I and 2 children, and then added a third while we were there, lived with her for several months during the summer just prior to finishing my PhD. She was a hard-working, dedicated saint who was always learning and loved to learn. After her husband's death, she returned to school and graduated from BYU at the age of 53. I think she had a college degree before she had a driver's license. When her children were raised, she went on a mission to Jacksonville, Florida, where she preferred to work with the younger sister missionaries as companions. And I'm sure she had them working. While I was here in school, she lived just north of the Marriott Center, and we would often visit for family home evening or stop in to get a homemade roll. They were always available. And even as she slowed with age, she always was learning. She enrolled in a Spanish class at the Senior Citizen Center when she was in her 90s and was trying to learn Spanish. She was a powerful example of serving and working. Similarly, my mother was a grade school teacher. Oops, I'll go back to her. You can see her right here. She was a grade school teacher who always encouraged reading and learning. Now in her 90s herself, she loves to watch educational YouTube videos that are coordinated with the Come Follow Me curriculum, or that speculate about the timing of the second coming. She's especially fond of those. She's always learning, and she instilled in me a love for education and a desire to read and learn. As a result of these influences, along with the others, including my father and other family members, teachers, mentors, church leaders, doctrine that I read about in learning, and even my patriarchal blessing, which says, I bless you that you will take advantage of every opportunity to learn. I believe I was a natural fit for a position at a university where we are constantly learning. I should note that I never had some clear prophetic vision or personal drive for my current kind of work, for the work that I'm doing, but rather, step by step along the way, I made small, but in hindsight, inspired decisions that eventually led to a faculty position, and then to university administrative work. When I was first approached about taking an administrative position, one of the reasons I decided to do it was because I felt that I knew how to be an effective professor, but a leadership position would be a challenging opportunity to learn and grow. That naive thought was certainly true, and eventually led to both pleasant and painful experiential learning. I'm convinced now that this gradual process of preparation was essential for my learning. If the Lord had revealed to me when I was 20 that I was going to be a dean for 16 years of my career, I would have said, what's a dean? And I'm certain my preparations for that anticipated job would have been completely misguided and out of sync with the ultimate expectations. Instead, a little light shined on the path in front of me that gradually helped me to be ready for the responsibilities and the future results. Ended up being a smoother transition to the job. So today, I hope to share with you some of those on-the-job lessons, those little bits of light that shined on the path ahead of me that I discovered over the years. Before I share those lessons, I think it would be important to say that I believe in Jesus Christ as the source of all light and truth and the Savior of the world. He is the ultimate example of leadership. The power for all positive progress and change originates with him. I try to be a faithful disciple and follow him in all my work and to acknowledge him as the fount of every true principle. Hopefully, some of the lessons I now discuss will reflect that aspiration. If there is any truth in this collection of lessons, I want to acknowledge him up front as the source of that truth. If there's, that was the worst place for a break right there talking about the Savior. I wouldn't want to interrupt any of that. So let me just say this, if there's any truth in this collection of lessons, I want to acknowledge him up front as the source of that truth. Okay, now the lessons. In 1996, I was asked to serve as the branch president of a little branch in Athens, Ohio. I was to be sustained and set apart on the same day that a new church building was to be dedicated. We'd been housed in an old two-story building that was purchased from another denomination, and the members were super excited to finally have a building after 40 years of waiting. So as a result, we invited former members of the branch back for the celebration and the dedication. As a result, there were 5 previous branch presidents that were in attendance at the dedication, and the stake president invited them to participate in helping to set me apart as the new branch president. In that moment, as they gathered around me, those 5 previous branch presidents and the stake president, it was evident to me that my time as a leader was almost over as soon as I started. And that in not many days, I would join with the 5 who were present and become part of the history of the leadership of that branch. Every leader will soon be replaced. We serve and we help, and then someone else takes over. From that time forward, I've had little trouble with transitions in leadership, either in work or in church. My hope is to contribute when it's my turn, to leave the organization a little better than when I started, and to wish the next person all the best as they take their turn, Dean Walker. But no leader is indispensable. Making decisions by yourself in a vacuum with only your own thoughts and ideas is an easy way to make mistakes. Collaborating helps you to see other points of view, anticipate potential problems, and see the benefits of alternative directions. It's also essential to have confidence. You can consult with who are outside of your organization. In both church and academic leadership, I've benefited from having wise associates and consultants who work together with me, resulting in hopefully more thoughtful decisions. An extreme example of a leader deviating from decisions of the council, resulting in devastating ends, involved the Mountain Meadow Massacre. I'll not go into the details of that tragedy and how leading by council could and should have averted that massacre. But Isaac Haight, who was the stake president, later said regarding the massacre, I would give a world if I had it, if we had abided by the decision of the council. Many decisions during my time as a dean involved significant counsel with others. One I thought that might be worth sharing, and that George mentioned, involved a committee labeled the Futures Committee, chaired by Richard Davis in political science. And when looking at our alumni surveys, they noticed that our graduates were often engaged in church service, but were more rarely engaged in community service. And this led to the establishment of the Civic Engagement Leadership Office, including the development of a minor program. And the input of faculty in an area that I frankly wouldn't have considered myself has now helped many students to be more engaged in our community and hopefully post-graduation. Listening to the people in your organization is essential to effective leadership. According to Edgar Schein, in the U.S. we typically work in settings where there is a culture of do and tell. That is, getting tasks done, doing, is valued over relationships, and telling people what to do or what you know, telling, is valued over asking and listening. His alternative, Edgar Schein's, is called humble inquiry, in which questions are used to draw others out and learn things you don't know, and to build relationships based on curiosity and interest in the other person. This ability to engage in humble inquiry and listening well is a helpful leadership skill. Listening well also implies being available. If you're not accessible, excellent listening skills will be of little value. In addition to humble inquiry, motivational interviewing has deeply influenced my work in all areas of my life. Motivational interviewing is a psychology-based intervention originally developed for the treatment of addictions, but which is expanded for use in many settings, including educational settings. It includes reflective listening and eliciting or evoking the other person's values, desires, and motivations. Telling, instilling, lecturing, coercing, doing to people typically doesn't help them to change. In contrast, listening, asking, collaborating, drawing forth, and evoking helps them to connect with and act on their own motivations. For example, when we met with faculty candidates after their successful rank and status cases to give them feedback, we'd ask them to come prepared to discuss their strengths and areas for continuing development. After talking about their strengths, we would ask them what areas of faculty work they felt gave them the most difficulty and how they thought they could improve in those areas. Inevitably, they would mention every area of concern raised by the review process in their own statement. So we could simply ask how we could be of assistance. To me, this process seems so much preferable to bringing a candidate in to lecture them about how or why they need to be more productive in their faculty work. The business leader Lee Iacocca said, "I hire people brighter than me and then I get out of their way." It is factually correct that at BYU we hire people that are brighter than me. The only choice for me then is whether to get out of the way or not. More than simply getting out of the way, however, we can choose to empower and value and invest in people. Like the domestique in long-distance cycling races, I saw my job as bringing water to the elite racers on our team who have a chance to excel. There are many ways to do this. As I just noted, one way is listening well. Providing resources, something I will address separately in a minute, is another way. Though funding is essential, I notice that small social graces seem to be more important, such as seeking input from people in your organization, being responsive to emails, taking some appointments at the spur of the moment, being mentally present when you're in that appointment, trusting others to do their work and give them room to do that work in the way that they prefer to do it, noticing and expressing gratitude for the works of students and staff and faculty members. In his autobiography, Nelson Mandela was a leader who was especially good at recognizing and thanking those who were often overlooked in whatever setting he was visiting. I also tried to follow that example by doing little things like taking a few minutes to visit with the student custodian who was taking out the trash, or connecting with the student server who was serving my table in a banquet. Learn how to be in the middle. This is the advice you hear most commonly when you're an academic administrator, especially for chairs, but also for deans. And it's very common in informal conversations. On the one hand, you need to be your organization's advocate who vigorously lobbies for its needs and resources. On the other hand, you need to be a good university citizen and represent the administration by accepting and communicating the limits on resources and the logic of decisions that consider the entire university. Over 40 years of studying and working at various universities, I interacted with administrators who got that balance wrong on both ends of this spectrum. Those who only battled for their unit and never took a broader university perspective, and those who were the consummate good soldier and never advocated for their unit. Neither worked, and finding the balance is an art that deserves constant attention and adjustment. Leaders can, if they take advantage of the opportunity, use their position and resources to benefit those with little systemic power. I felt an obligation to improve our ability to serve students who traditionally face additional challenges, such as students who need academic accommodations, students of color, first-generation students, students who were survivors of sexual assault, students with mental health challenges, etc. Perhaps the most visible example of my efforts to live up to this principle was my service on the Advisory Council on campus response to sexual assault and the subsequent campus climate survey to survey students regarding their experiences with sexual assault in a devotional. I could not do everything. I didn't have the bandwidth to even do all that was needed. But it is possible to make a difference by doing something. And I realized that an acceptance of things as they are is tacit approval of systemic indifference. And I learned that I was happier with myself as I used my position to make a difference. While serving as a dean at both institutions, I asked chairs to nominate teachers that I could observe in the classroom. Not for evaluation purposes, but rather as a way of connecting with excellent teachers. Over those 16 years, I visited the classrooms of hundreds of instructors and had the opportunity to discuss teaching with them briefly after I watched them and thanked them for their work. And sometimes I gave them some BYU fudge. They like that part best. My most important takeaway about effective teaching from those visits was this: teachers who know themselves and authentically and genuinely use their strengths are more effective than teachers who try to be someone or something other than who they are. An entertaining teacher should entertain, and a nerdy intellectual teacher should be goofy and intellectual. But the entertainer shouldn't attempt to be nerdy, and the intellectual shouldn't try to entertain. This principle also applies to administrators. Leaders will be most effective when playing to their strengths. Consistent with that, it's helpful to have associates whose strengths help to offset or compensate for your weaknesses. In my case, I felt that my strengths had to do with optimism and transparency and establishing a culture of support and encouragement for experimentation. What I lacked in detail orientation for events and programs and other administrative tasks was often covered by my associate and assistant deans, and they made us look good when I had relatively little to do with those actual operations. Related to this notion of knowing and using your strengths is the role of vision in every job, but especially when serving as a leader of an organization. I watched with admiration the focus that President Worthen places on the mission and aims of the BYU education. That conveniently provided focus for my work in the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences. I also recognized that being a visionary was not necessarily a strength of mine, nor was it needed. Faculty generally know best the direction they should proceed in their departments and disciplines or in their individual teaching and research. I could, however, pursue a vision that was more abstract and included principles such as these: aligning your work with the university mission, creating an optimistic environment and welcoming feedback and input, being open and transparent, and promoting experimentation, or focusing on helping departments and individuals to develop their plans and to be recognized, rather than focusing on developing a college identity. The truth is that most of our alumni couldn't remember the name of our college anyway. And that is funny. Come on. That is funny. And they felt their strongest affinity to their home department. And therefore, although it was a bit controversial, I felt it was our job to help establish the identity of those departments, rather than trying to develop an identity as a college. In a book about being a dean that I read early in my time, the author said that one of his regrets was not saying yes to faculty and staff proposals more frequently. He went on to say that he wished he had taken more risks when trying to decide whether to support various proposals. Because I discovered this idea early in my tenure, I decided that rather than predetermining which ideas were good or poor, I would work hard to find funds to support proposals, knowing the best would rise to the top and generate further interest in funding, and the rest would drift away. Evolution, as it were. I discovered that some ideas that I initially felt were not so great turned out to be quite fruitful. And some I thought were genius never caught on. But more important than that, I learned that my role was less about generating or even evaluating ideas, and more about supporting and finding resources and removing bureaucratic barriers so faculty could experiment and have room to explore. My favorite example of this is the establishment of our civil rights seminars. A faculty member asked for support to develop an African American civil rights seminar, and I helped provide some discretionary dean funding to experiment with the course. And then, given its success, over time we established other similar seminars exploring Native American, Latino, Latina, and soon Asian American and Pacific Islander civil rights histories. I did my best to help develop the options and find ways to keep the programs going through establishing precedents and funding. And these faculty have developed a wonderful and transformative resource for our students. A good portion of the work of the leader is solving problems. The more people you have within your organization and the more layers of managed reporting to you, the more difficult the problems become. Chairs solve problems in their departments. If they run into difficulties, they come to the dean. If the dean runs into difficulties, she turns to the academic vice president, etc. When I was serving as chair of our department in Ohio, I was also serving as the branch president, consulting on clinical cases a day a week, and we had 7 children under the age of 15. I felt like every setting that I lived and worked in was filled with problems to be solved. One day, I was feeling a bit sorry for myself when I had a sudden insight. Some might say it was an inspired rebuke. The realization was first that I had been blessed with a set of unique talents for helping people that was combined with a life of relatively few difficulties and little adversity. And second, that I had a responsibility to be a consecrated disciple and use my talents and advantages to serve others. In other words, serving others was the very reason and purpose for my specific gifts and circumstances. Although I still have had plenty of moments when I felt sorry for myself since then, that inspiration changed my perspective and helped me to recognize that a central purpose of my life was to be consistently helpful as a problem solver and a more consecrated disciple. For example, I was once in the middle of an extremely busy day as a dean in which I only had a few minutes to eat a peanut butter sandwich and then move on to other work. The day was full of meetings, and I was hoping to use a brief gap of time to catch up on email and work on other pressing assignments while I ate. As I ate the sandwich, a craving for a glass of milk emerged. Milk goes with peanut butter sandwiches, right? And I didn't want to settle for water this time, so I searched around in my desk and found enough change to go downstairs in the Kimball Tower to the vending machines. Now, mind you, I worked in the Kimball Tower for 10 years, and I only went to the vending machines 2 or 3 times total in that entire 10 years, so this was unusual. As I walked past the students on the ground floor, I recognized one of the young women as a member of the young single adult stake that I was serving in as a stake president. As I passed her, I had the thought that I should visit with her, and she did look somewhat distressed. But I went on to the vending machines. On the way back with my milk, I had the same thought. So I sat down on the bench next to her and started a conversation. She ended up coming up to my office to visit for 30 minutes about questions she had regarding the educational and personal challenges that she was facing. I never got around to those other tasks, but when reviewing the day later that evening, I recognized that the most important meeting I had that day was with this young woman. For several years, I kept that empty milk bottle on my shelf, so it could remind me that people come first before tasks. And my most useful purpose in life was to notice and to help solve problems, especially for students. Leaders often receive criticism that is directed to them because of their position in the institution. Unfortunately, that criticism can sometimes feel personal and be taken personally. Of course, it's also true that one may receive personal criticism, but my experience is that usually faculty, staff, and students have good intentions and want the best for the institution, and the criticism comes from a shared desire for institutional success. As a result, I tried not to take feedback personally, but rather to connect with the underlying wish of the person, a wish that I usually shared. For example, I once had a chair in Ohio meet with me and my associate deans regarding a request for help to offer more lab sections in a science department. The chair's approach was very aggressive and defensive right from the start, and the meeting was tense. After the meeting, my associate deans were offended. In our subsequent discussion of the proposal, they were having a hard time separating the chair's combative style from the facts regarding the needs of the students in that department. From my point of view, it was crucial to hear the chair's concern for the students without being provoked into denying a request simply because his social graces were underdeveloped. In an administrative position, you may have a myriad of possible tasks to undertake and changes to initiate. You cannot do it all. You need to pick and choose what you use your time on, and some tasks may need to be done with average effort and average performance. Key tasks, however, need to be done well. I often did triage on tasks. Really? That is very great. What this means is that I ran out of paper in my printer, and it didn't finish printing the rest. But luckily for me, I have a box. I should be able to pull this up right now. That is just wonderful. Or maybe not. Yes. Do you have it? Oh, that would be awesome. Thank you, Carl. Look at that. Carl knows where I am. There are some changes, but this should work. What did I say last? Someone?
Something about prioritizing.
Thank you. As I observed others, I sometimes noticed leaders who were a bit more perfectionistic, who became paralyzed because they wanted every task to be completed with a high degree of quality. These same people often felt guilty if a task was completed without meeting personal standards. There may be those who can perform at an extremely high level, but for me, I needed to both prioritize and become comfortable with average in some of my duties. Luckily, I'm quite comfortable with average, so I didn't ruminate much. Serving in a leadership role inevitably involves making tough decisions about people and in some cases about their livelihood. These are some of the most difficult and stressful activities of an academic leader. One thing that helped me to handle the pressure was the fact that someone needed to take the institutional perspective on the hiring or firing decision. It was often difficult for the colleagues and co-workers of an individual to see beyond the fact that their friend and colleague was not going to be hired or was losing their job. However, it was true that a whole different group of people in the organization of the future needed to be considered. For example, perhaps it was better for future students to hire someone else. In some circumstances, I was one of the few people in the organization who had a stewardship to consider and weigh more heavily the benefit to the people of the institution of the future. One of the questions I would ask myself in a situation about hiring or firing was something like this. Would I entrust my child to this person as a student employee, or a student in their course, or as a research assistant working closely with them? Or would I prefer to have the opportunity to hire someone else in the future to handle that responsibility? This is stressful work, but you can see how my response to that question might help to make that hard decision. Disputes, complaints, grievances, and appeals are infrequent, but difficult for university citizens to manage. The increased stress and anxiety associated with the complaint or appeal often resulted in the persons involved wishing or sometimes even pressuring others to skip steps in a policy-driven process so they can jump right to the conclusion, which they assume will turn out in their favor, of course. More than once, a student, faculty member, or chair approached me with the argument that the process should be subverted so they could get back to work. My experience was that the best thing to do is to trust the process rather than to avoid it. Besides, as one faculty member told me when I consulted with him on a thorny case, and he recommended patience to see what came of the process, he said this: "It's an awfully skinny pancake that only has one side." When we follow procedures outlined in a policy, that was carefully crafted before a time of stress, it typically works out. Now, I realize there's no guarantee, but again, my experience is that individuals in the process work in good faith, and the proper outcome is generally identified through a thorough vetting. It's painful and difficult for those who wait, but in the end, good processes and good people typically find the appropriate way forward. Now, you see that I meant what I said in the beginning. In no particular order, I just tossed out a kitchen sink full of administrative lessons learned. Hopefully that kitchen sink may have something as tasty in it as the chocolate lover's kitchen sink offered at Disney World. I didn't say all that I learned, nor can I guarantee that I always stayed true to these ideals while I served. I can say with confidence that I aspired to stay true to good principles, even when I was inconsistent in my leadership for one reason or another. Whether these lessons learned can be classified as inspired academic wisdom, common sense leadership, or something worse, I will leave for you to determine or ignore as you see fit. For me, it was at times both agonizing and satisfying to reflect on my service as an academic administrator. I hope that though these lessons come from the dark side, that each of you found one or more that might be of value to your work. If you did, then the introspective agony that I experienced was certainly worth it. I probably should have been more open and vulnerable regarding my faith as part of this journey. I hope you can see it woven in and around and through every lesson learned. My desire is to first be faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ in every part of my life in a seamless way. I hoped that too when I was a dean at a public institution, that it could be seen. If that was ineffectively communicated, please accept my apologies. And finally, I cannot in good conscience talk about my work without thanking my wife, Maureen, and our children for their support and encouragement and tolerance of my stressful yet rewarding work. I'm grateful that they understand me and know how best to provide me with the room to get that work done. Thank you. We got started just a little late, but we have a few minutes maybe for a question or two. You have to teach, please go. Bruce.
What was the hardest thing about taking over as the dean in this college?
Will you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure, I will. He said, what was the hardest thing about taking over as dean here at BYU when I came back? I think it's learning a new institution, going from public to private institution. That means just different processes. And public institutions are so wide open, right? Any email I sent, I had to imagine that it would be in the newspaper the next day because a reporter could request open records. Anything that I wrote or said, right? So the opaqueness of BYU and the conservativeness of BYU, conservative not in a political sense, but conservative in being very careful, not being the first out in front on things, I had to get used to that sort of environment. That was probably one of the harder things, I would say. Susan.
How did you stay in touch with your scholarship during, that's a long time to be an administrator. How did you balance that?
Yeah, when I was first a dean, the way I did it and chair, I still had graduate students. And what I would do is I'd set up a meeting with my graduate student every other week. And that 1 hour meeting every other week on the calendar forced me to be ready because I didn't want to be embarrassed by not having done something by the time that came. Plus, having students that are relying on you to read their work and to help give them feedback and to help them have publications that will prepare them for their future. That's sufficient motivation to get you to do it. When I got here, it was tougher because I didn't have graduate students. So I had to find collaborators And, but it got tougher and tougher the farther I got away, because I just didn't have stuff in the pipeline like I did early on. My goal was to publish something, at least one thing every year, and I managed to do that all but 1 year, and I have regrets about that. I really wish I could have published at least one thing that year. And sometimes it was just nice collaborators who were kind enough to come and find me and help me, especially at the end, because and now I'm gearing up, of course, to do that again. It's pretty fun. Yeah, George.
What do you think the secret to renewal is over the course? I mean, I'm sure you experienced burnout and found yourself needing to remember again why you chose this career and got yourself through. So what are your secrets to a long-term, sustainable, happy, fulfilling career?
Yeah, one of the things, as an academic administrator, one of the things for me is I taught a class every year. And being in the classroom with students who had fresh ideas and were eager, especially early in fall, there's something about being on a campus early in fall, right, when students are eager and ready. That helped me remind me what my job was then. And you gotta have other things to do, right? Golf on Saturday morning helps me survive. It was an unbelievable lifeline when I was reading all the reports for the sexual assault thing over that summer in particular. So having some hobbies or something that's completely different, sometimes it's working in a garden or remodeling a basement or something like that, but for me it can be other work, it just has to be different work. And for me, part of it is just personality too, because I sleep ask Maureen, I sleep every night regardless. I mean, it's a rare night that I don't sleep, and it's just a gift. I'm asleep within 8 minutes every night. And so it has to be something really stressful before I wake up in the middle of the night, and I just don't take stuff home with me. Partly that may be because I'm a therapist too. And so, being in a room with someone who's thinking about hurting themselves, that's stressful. Worrying about a faculty member who's complaining about me, that doesn't compare to someone who's thinking about hurting themselves. So it didn't have the same effect. Yes?
Matt, you mentioned about not being a martyr. Can you tell me more about that? I mean, how do you avoid that?
Thanks, Spencer. I think it's totally impossible, right? I mean, some of the times I just felt sorry for myself, but after I had that sort of an epiphany or an inspired moment, I tried to remember by looking back to that and saying, look, your job is to help people. And that served as a reminder. I don't know, I guess you find ways to remind yourself. So putting the empty milk bottle on my shelf was a way to remind myself that, look, you took this position, you can't now whine about it, right? You just do your best in the position and try to help people. And remember that you have gifts and circumstances that were purposely put there to help you. But it's not easy. I mean, I still felt sorry for myself sometimes, for sure. Yeah.
So when we've had department conversations related to performance, and it's based on publications, I think you mentioned like doing what's best for the future students. Those conversations are really, really difficult, and the answer is they're not going to get tenure. But I'm not in a leadership role, but we don't have to think about like the faith component that the university might have to think about. And I think a lot of us, like when you think about it in an abstract way, it's very simple, but then when you think about the individual, it gets much more complex.
Yeah, it really does.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that's very difficult, and deans have it a little easier, right? Because we're not in the department, and we're not the best friend of the person, and we don't interact with them day in and day out. And so that allows us to be a little bit more abstract about it, and to think about these things and how they are integrated together, right? And so the kinds of arguments that I would think about were, because people would make arguments like, well, they are so good with the students, but they don't have any publications. And I would say, well, publications inform the way that they interact with students, and publications are part of their faith and what we believe about this entire institution, our mission at BYU. And so trying to find a path forward that's integrated in that way, and that doesn't fall into the trap of arguing that we should be the best private liberal arts kind of school, or just like all the tier 1 research institutions, but we should be like we are, which is that unique BYU mission, which is focused on undergraduates, but requires us to be researchers. I've said more about what I think about that than how to come to an integrated view of it. I don't think it's easy.
Yeah. So your answer was kind of more about like publications, though, but and maybe as your role as a stake president here, but how have you navigated where like it's more of a faith issue versus publication issue? Because I think that's where it gets really complicated.
Yeah, I just don't think it's can't be and, right? I don't really fall for the argument of someone's building I'm not sure, maybe I don't understand the question, but someone could be building the faith of students and doing a terrific job of doing that. But if they're not publishing, then they're not doing part of the job.
Yeah, I guess what I'm asking is if they don't have, like if they basically have left the faith.
Oh,
But
yeah.
they're happy with you.
You want the other way around.
Yeah, to me it just seems so complicated for administrators to have to deal with those issues.
Yeah, and that is difficult, especially because there's very few objective ways to evaluate that, right? I saw it in my time as dean. Usually it showed up in teaching evaluations, right? And over my 10 years, there were some people who didn't pass a review because of faith-related issues, in part, but they were also often integrated with teaching. It was hard to separate them from their teaching and their influence on students. Yeah.
So sometimes students and a lot of faculty shy away from leadership positions, sometimes to the point of, I don't even want to go up for promotion because I don't want to get asked to do leadership. What would you say to younger faculty and to students about the benefits of being a leader and why they might want to be open to that?
They might want to be open to that. I think the number of leadership positions compared to the number of faculty is relatively few, so the first thing they should figure out is if they have the temperament for it, right? If this is really something that they can do. Why would they want to do it? Because you're still helping students, but just in a more distal way, right? So when you're a chair, you're helping faculty to be successful so that they can help students. When you're a dean, you're helping chairs to be successful so they can help faculty so that they can help students. And you have a chance to influence things in a broader way that have a larger number of students. And also there's something really fun and learning about it, right? I remember when I was first dean in Ohio, meeting the faculty in physics and chemistry and biology. I felt like I was back in college. Only this time I wasn't trying to get out of taking my general education. I was actually enjoying my general education, right? And so it was a wonderful opportunity to get to know people and to know more about the institution, and I learned a lot. So that's a good reason too. I don't know if that's, I should ask you too, like, why are you doing it? Maybe you're asking yourself that every day. It's probably 4 o'clock and you can send me an email. So thanks a lot, everybody.